Good afternoon. My name is Ethan Giacomo, and this is a presentation on disposal of waste falling under the Waste Management Unit at Edith Cowan University. Now, if you excuse me for this presentation, I'm looking at the camera, but I'm also looking at my slides. To kick things off, hello, my name, as we talked about, is Ethan, and the purpose of this presentation is to talk about the disposal of waste. I've approached it from a rural aspect where most waste management is characterised by on-farm disposal. Here, there are limited recycling options, and most local shires run their waste centres, which is predominantly landfill. Occasionally, this is contracted out. An example of this is in the Shire of Kojna and Broomhill Tamballup, where Warren Blackwood Waste have waste transfer sites, and they're only open 4 hours a week, and waste is carted out to a main landfill. Shires further out often burn rubbish, often tips spontaneously catch on fire. And moving away from rubbish and into work, most of my work is somewhat related to waste management. Was working with Parks and Wildlife within the nature reserve. So think things such as rubbish removal, illegal clearing investigations, and issues with toxic waste, such as asbestos and chemical drums. So a brief overview of what I'm going to address in the next 20 minutes is the importance of the correct disposal, the regulatory hurdles, and ways to reduce landfill usage. We touch on the history of landfill, ways that we can recover resources so they're not going to landfill, contamination issues with methane, and we also have quite an in-depth look at waste to energy plants. So I hear you ask, why disposal of waste? Well, if we just had rubbish lying everywhere, there's issues with disease transmission, and it smells, and it's unsightly. Now, waste management wasn't really thought about much, but until the 19th century when people started living in cities, and it was mainly around contamination of water sources. So think typhoid, diarrhea, etc. And this waste management was driven by interest in human health rather than by care for the environment. However, in today's climate, it's important to preserve the environment, recover materials, reduce landfill, and minimise impacts to human health. The two images you're looking at, the one on the left, is Lake King Tip in 2023, and the one on the right is Bullfinch's Tip, which is a small town about 40 kilometres north of Southern Cross. These are two very good examples of rural tips where anyone can go in and out at any time they want. There's no tip person, and they're open all the time. There is occasionally segregated waste, so metals go in one area, waste oil goes in another area, but often everything gets thrown in the same hole. Now, the history of waste management in Australia is quite an interesting topic to go down, and it's historically based on landfills. However, in recent times, there's been a shift towards reduce, reuse, and recycling. The burn, bash, and bury methodology, where you burn the rubbish, bash the rubbish, and bury the rubbish, is starting to fade. In urban areas, verge-side collection is quite common. However, in remote areas, you're 400 kilometres from the tip, and many residents take their own bins to the tip, and often some areas don't even offer a bin collection service. People might say that you're not recycling very well, or you're only increasing waste if you're putting it all in the same hole in the ground in a remote area. However, keep in mind you might have to truck it 800 kilometres, and the cost and the time just blows it out of the water. We touch on this truck down here, which is a hydraulic compacting rubbish truck. The first one was invented in 1968 as people realised, we can use less people, we don't have to have people running after the truck to lift the bins up, and it can also carry more rubbish. The image on the left is the style of bin that is often used on a verge. Now, some key terms that I'm going to touch on throughout this presentation are listed below. And this is the Lake King Tip again, but this is after it's spontaneously caught on fire and it's smoked for a number of days. As you can see, there's a lot less waste, but it wasn't incinerated, and it smells like burning plastic. Hence, starting from the top, Leachate is a toxic liquid that forms when water, often rainfall, moves through landfills. It can also occur through things such as stormwater, flash flooding, and rainwater percolating through the soil. This leachate often contains organic materials and heavy metals and chemicals like PFAS. WTE stands for waste to energy. Waste is burnt at high temperatures to convert waste into electricity and heat. The working face of a landfill, as shown in this picture, is an area of a landfill that is being actively used, while the cell of a landfill is a specific area of a landfill generally being closed over. What's not shown in this picture is that immediately behind this trench was another trench that was filled up with rubbish, and then when that was full, they just closed it over and dug another hole and started all over again. Now, a transfer station is different to a tip. A transfer station is where rubbish is often unloaded into like a concrete box, and then front end loaders pick it up, put it in a road train, and away it goes. An example of this is in the city of Stirling, is Balcatta transfer station. There's trucks going in and out all day long, carting wasted tomato pulp, and it's then buried. Balcatta is in a large residential area of Perth, and it's not feasible to bury rubbish there anymore. Talking about landfills, the edge of the Swan River, a lot of that reclaimed land around Ascot and Burswood was a rubbish chip. Rubbish was dumped in the Swan River and built up to a point where it could then be built on top of. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, but putrescible waste is organic waste that has decomposed, creating odours and attracting pests, hence all the bin chickens getting around it. NIMBY is something you might buy at the shop, but it stands for not in my backyard, and it's often used to describe backlash for projects, such as waste to energy plants. Now, landfill requirements, again focusing on rural areas. Most landfills in Western Australia fall under or are governed by the Environmental Protection Act of 1986. Further, we get into the regulations, and the Environmental Protection Rural Landfill Regulations of 2002 dictates the following conditions, which are: waste is to be covered monthly, fortnightly, or weekly, depending on how often the tip is being used. You must have a stop-proof fence around the tip, which is to be constructed to prevent wind blowing rubbish out of the tip. You often know you're going to a rural tip because there's a line of rubbish going up to it. Green waste can be burnt on site, however other rubbish can't, and there's no dust to be done. No waste is to be put within 3 metres of any water table or 100 metres of any surface water body. Now, the reason I've included this picture, which is out in magenta between Newdigate and Ravensthorpe, is to highlight the water table that is often in rural areas. Following excessive clearing, water tables rising, salinity issues, all that jazz, the water table is often at the surface of the water body. So you can imagine, in order to build a tip that's underground, you have to somehow deal with the surface water that's at the water tables at the top of the soil profile. When you're planning to close the tip, you have to submit a rehabilitation plan 18 months prior to closure. Now, getting out of Australia and flying overseas, we go to a country such as India, which has landfill guidelines on paper, but for those who have been to India, the concept of a bin doesn't seem to exist. And given the amount of waste in the streets and the ocean, these regulations only aren't enforced. If we jump on our A380 and travel over to Sweden and Japan, they both have tightly regulated landfills, mainly to do with the sheer number of people in the country. Both governments encourage reuse and recycling and discourage landfill use with multiple waste to energy plants in Sweden, not only burning rubbish, but also generating heat. They had the unusual scenario that they ran out of rubbish in their own country, so they bring in rubbish from other countries to keep the house warm. Now, this image here is from a Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, so we can thank the federal pollies for that. This graph shows the resource recovery rates in 2022 to 2023. So we're looking at different breakdowns of states. I see you look at that and you think, geez Louise, New South Wales is getting a bit out of control. But MSW, municipal solid waste, climbed strongly in the last 2 years. However, that has been linked to a rollout of the organics bin. Now I go back to leachate, and I'll refresh your memory here. So leachate is a liquid that leaches from landfills, often running into waterways. And you think, oh, well, this is less than ideal, and the image on the left here is it's quite a nice little box of how a landfill should look. But in reality, we looked at the image on the right, which is out near north of Lake Barley, and where you can see just on the edge of the salt lake, no, you can't drive on it, it's too soft. There is plenty of rubbish. Tyres are a favourite because they're expensive to be disposed of. And of course, you dump every piece of farm machinery that has ever been in existence on your farm for the slight chance you might need a spare washer. Historically, low-lying areas were used for landfills, areas of land that couldn't be used for any other purpose. However, in more modern times, the importance of correct management of landfills is critical. There are lots of regulations surrounding the bunding of waste, which are particularly stringent, dictating the depth of landfills, the thickness of the impermeable layer, and monitoring requirements. Now this gets very expensive for small tips, hence shires are often trucking waste to larger landfills where multiple shires can spread the cost. Now, with regards to leachate, there's a few ways to manage it. You can either don't let it get in there, or you can have special drainage systems to get it out, evaporate it off the top, or designing areas so waste isn't near a watercourse. Now, methane is generated through a process called anaerobic decomposition, which is a breakdown of organic matter in landfills without oxygen. This can be mitigated in a number of ways, such as installing gas collection systems, limiting the face of the landfill, so covering the rubbish over, and diverting organic waste, such as by using food, organics, or garden organic bins. Green top bins, throw your green waste in, and it gets turned into compost. If you're really on the ball, you can collect the gas, set it off to a power plant, burn the gas, generate steam, run a turbine, and turn it into electricity. Now this is what you're looking at here is Australia's first waste energy plant, and we are in the fortunate state where it was built in Kwinana in Western Australia. So it's able to power 58,000 homes, and it's estimated to reduce CO2 emissions by 460,000 tonnes annually, producing 38 gigawatt hours of electricity. To do this, they burn about 500,000 tonnes of waste annually. Now, this reduces the volume of the waste by about 90%, and some of this ash can be used to make concrete. However, there are some concerns that the public perceive it as easier to burn waste rather than recycle it, which can lead to more waste. We'll touch more on that later. Now, what you're looking at here is one of the highest tech waste to energy plants known to man, and this is a cast iron bath on stilts with a fire underneath it which burns waste wood. Now this uses offcuts to heat the water. However, this only runs at about 20% efficiency. Most of the heat gets blown out the side, or disappears, or is trapped in the ground. However, when we look at waste to energy plants, they're able to reduce waste by up to 90%. And unlike the system below, the smoke is scrubbed, reducing toxic emissions. There's a few environmental impacts because there's the potential to destroy recoverable materials, and materials that aren't supposed to be burnt are shipped overseas where they can then be burnt. The regulations are too tight here. Now, waste to energy isn't the only way to get rid of it. You can also do gasification, which is processing biomass at high temperatures without burning, which produces syngas. You can ferment waste and distill it, turn it into ethanol, or you can use microorganisms to break down biomass in an oxygen-free environment to produce methane in anaerobic digestion. Now, we look at the scalability here. This picture of blue shipping containers is an example of a portable waste-to-energy setup. As commercial waste grows and grows, we're buying more stuff, there's an increasing liability to not just put it in the ground and hope for the best. It's expensive to manage, it's difficult to dispose of, and there's high scrutiny in the area. If you cast your mind back 40, 50 years to the US, you might think of an area called the Love Canal, which is in Niagara. There was a large a local shire tried to build a canal. It didn't work out, so they sold the land to a chemical producing company that produced dyes and perfumes and solvents, and they put their waste in 44-gallon drums, put it in the canal, thought, you ripper, cover it with soil, sell the land off to a housing development who then built houses and a school on top of it, and then they realised, oh, hang on a second, the chemicals are leaching up and giving people a multitude of problems who are living on top of the toxic waste dump. With this in mind, we now have waste energy plants and landfill regulations. Now, these plants can be small, such as below here, and can also be used as decentralised energy systems, where a community's waste can be used to produce electricity for the town site, reducing not only waste, but transportation and electricity distribution costs. Could increase the resiliency of the grid. Now, some states are restricting waste-to-energy plants with legislation, thereby restricting a national approach. This is, again, a highly political space, and whilst waste-to-energy plants are banned within the Sydney metropolitan area, they are allowed in rural areas, leading to the not in my backyard and backlash from rural areas saying, well, if you're not going to put it in their backyard, why are you going to put it in my backyard? Now, there's a few environmental impacts that come with burning rubbish. A, you've got to truck it. B, you have things left over. There's obviously greenhouse gas emissions, so burning rubbish counts towards Australia's CO2 emissions, and this can create a culture of burning rubbish. Often, if a waste-to-energy plant is produced, it is owned by a private company, and there's contractual agreements for the shire local government to provide the waste. For example, I referred to Europe earlier. Some waste plants have to import rubbish to meet their contractual requirements. There's also concerns about air pollutants, as traces of toxins can be emitted even after the waste is treated. And there's, of course, ash management. Now, this little picture here I found on the Green site, and they weren't particularly keen on burning waste, but they did have a few interesting points. And this one here shows the amount of waste. So for every tonne of waste, you wipe off 72% of it, that disappears, and you're left with 30 kilograms of metal, so that can be reused, 30 kilograms of fly ash, which is the ash that can be used in concrete and road making. However, the majority of the bottom ash can't be reused, and it's required to be buried. It can contain such things as asbestos and concentrated toxins, so that you've taken away the majority of the problem, but you still have stuff to deal with. There's other issues too that can discourage recycling, because plastic is just a low grade of oil, and people say, well, what's the point of going to all the effort of recycle it if it's just going to get burnt anyways? Now, for a brief touch on the conclusion and the key recommendations. Effective waste disposal is essential for protecting human health and the environment, especially in remote and rural contexts, where landfill is the primary method for disposing of waste. This module, presentation, has highlighted how poor waste management can lead to serious issues such as leachate contamination, methane emissions, and long-term environmental degradation. Whilst landfills are highly regulated in Western Australia, low compliance has resulted in landfill sites that are becoming increasingly costly to manage as waste volumes grow. Resource recovery and waste energy plants, WTE, offer pathways to reduce reliance on landfills, recover recyclables from waste, and lower environmental impacts. Waste to energy plants, however, come with challenges such as greenhouse gas emissions, ash management, and they can potentially discourage recycling. Therefore, a balanced approach is required that prioritises waste reduction, recycling, and best practice disposal. The key recommendations are, for future research and industry development, is to ensure that landfills follow landfill compliance, they follow the rules, and they encourage shires to maintain compliance. Leachate is to be managed effectively through proper design, lining systems, and monitoring, whilst a reduction in greenhouse emissions, in methane emissions, is to implement a gas collection system, minimise the landfill phase, and divert organic waste, such as through a FOGO system. It's encouraged to strengthen resource recovery to improve recycling and resource recovery, reducing the volume of waste sent to landfill, whilst waste to energy plants to be researched further, ensuring that they complement rather than undermine recycling efforts and deliver environmental benefits. And that's all, folks.